All right, everyone, I want you to introduce you to Dr. Jim Dankovich. He's going to be talking today about a few different things, in particular, his son Chris, who's currently incarcerated. So he's going to give a lens on how there's a big ripple effect from crime. And it's not just the victims, it's not just the offender. The big thing is the families of people who are victims and also the offenders in different situations. So he's going to talk about that and how now I think through that experience, Jim will talk about how he's really engaged in policy reform from a criminal justice lens now because of these experiences with his son. So, like myself, if I never had any personal experience with the criminal justice system, to be honest, I would not care about CJ reform at all because I wasn't directly affected. I personally went through the system, but Jim was also directly affected by it through his son, who's currently in the system, and he's fighting to, eventually get him to come home and find ways to give him access to more rehabilitative programming to better himself. So when he does come home, he's more prepared for society and to be a productive member in society. So I'm going to just pass it over to Jim and let him go. And we appreciate you coming in.
Yes, thanks. So I'm Jim Dankovich, and I'm actually a graduate of University of Michigan, but I was actually at this campus a couple years ago, and I was looking through my papers, and what did I find but my first Inside Out Restorative Justice program. Some of you know what restorative justice is. Maybe, how many do know what it is, or how many don't? Let's say how many do know what it is. Okay, we've got a couple. Okay, let me talk a little bit about why I'm here and why, what I kind of want to talk about. 12 years ago, almost to the day, I got a phone call. I was a chiropractor. I practiced for 30 years in Birmingham. I got a phone call, and when I see patients, I don't like to be interrupted. It's about 8 o'clock in the morning. I started at 7 with patients. And one of my staffers said, Dr. Dankovich, you got a phone call. I said, well, I'll call him back. She said, no, you got to come now. And I said, well, I'm right in the middle. She said, you have to come down. So I walked down to my office, and she said, go sit in your office. And she never told me what to do. Right? She said, go sit in your office. And I picked up the phone. The guy said, are you sitting down? I never had anybody ask me that as a first question. And I said, no. He said, sit down. So I sat down. And he said, I've got some news for you. There's been there's been a crime at your former wife's house, and I need you to come there right now. I said, well, I've got patients. He said, I need you to come right now. So I went. And it was sort of a day that changed my life, because up until this point, 12 years ago, I thought a lot of different things about criminal justice, but I sure didn't know what it was about. So what happened is I got there, and my son had killed his mom. And there was a murder scene and all the crime tape and all that stuff that they talk about. And they asked me a lot of questions. And some of the questions are, well, you know where he is? I said, no. But he was supposed to go to see a psychiatrist that day, that Monday morning. I had left some phone messages for my former wife. They were just like really dull things, like I've got this insurance policy and they should cover it. You want to go to this person or that person. Anyway, he wasn't acting right. We knew that things were not good, but this is a kid that previous to that point, I actually brought some of the stuff that I probably should. Like, this is a kid who was on the honor roll every time. The biggest problem I had that morning is I realized my son, before this happened, had just gotten a C. This was a straight A student, just got a C. This is my biggest problem in my life, right? And suddenly I recognized that that wasn't my biggest problem in life. So as the whole process unwound, my practice was in Birmingham, Michigan, right? And if you know Birmingham, it's a pretty wealthy community. So I had a lot of patients who were attorneys and stuff. So I called one of the guys up. He was a federal attorney, and he said, no, this isn't a case I'll take. It's going to be in Oakland County. Who knew that attorneys specialize in counties, federal, juvenile, whatever. And this guy handles primarily juveniles who commit crimes in Oakland County. And that became a long, long, long journey during which I found out a lot of things. Well, they asked me where my son was. I said I didn't know. My son was 15 at this point. He got in the car. He couldn't drive, right? My previous experience with him driving is there we, you can figure out where this is going to go real quickly. We went over the school parking lot, right? There's one lamppost in the middle of the school parking lot, right? We're driving around for a while, and guess what? You know how that ended. He hit the one post in the entire parking lot. Wasn't a good driver, had not even taken driver training. But he took his mom's car and went to our cottage in northern Michigan. When he woke up, he was such a poor driver that he went south on I-75 before he realized that Detroit wasn't on the way to the cottage. This is a kid who is an A student, but not really like sharp with this stuff. And as it turned out, they sent out the SWAT teams, the helicopters. He said it was the first time. He said he always wanted to see assault rifles, but he never dreamt he would be looking down the other end of one. And they flew him by helicopter from northern Michigan back to Oakland County. I knew the Oakland County Sheriff. He had been a patient of mine. I got a chance to actually visit with my son before they locked him into the cell. At that point in my life, my son was 15, I thought, oh, he'll be in the juvenile justice system and he'll probably be out in a few years. That's not true. In Michigan, they have what's called automatic waivers. That means if you commit a heinous crime, you're automatically charged as an adult, no matter what your age is. So if you're 12 years old and you kill somebody, you're an adult. Doesn't matter, like, if you're 12. That seemed to me preposterous. And some of those pamphlets that are being passed around are on the Juvenile Lifer Project. Now, you may know, or you may not know, that the United States is the only country that locked up juveniles for life. No other place in the world do they do that. Michigan has 364 juvenile lifers that still are not out. We have an Attorney General who chose to challenge the Supreme Court decision and say that juveniles are not retroactively, it's not applied to juveniles retroactively. What that means in plain English is that if you committed a crime when you were a kid, you still can't get out. That was, again, challenged with the Supreme Court, and they're in the process right now of resentencing. I just happen to be at a resentencing. I write to juvenile lifers because part of my journey was to say, hey, this isn't right, now what do you do? Okay? This is not right to charge a child as an adult. Is it right to maybe remove him from society? Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of people should be removed from society when they can't live life and not be a safe person. But I think there are a lot of alternatives, and I was thinking about this the other night, and I thought that's sort of my experience. What I also learned is that the prosecutors in Michigan and in a lot of states have a lot of power. They can choose to settle a case or not settle a case. And as Aaron has probably told you, something like 80 to 90% of all cases never go to trial. They're settled outside. And there's a lot of pressure to settle a case by the prosecutor and the attorney and not go to court. Because if everybody went to court, our court system is already overcrowded, and it would be even worse. At the meeting that I was here, when we were talking about restorative justice, there was a guy who was an attorney. He was they call it in Minnesota, they call them district attorneys. Here we call them prosecutors. And he was a district attorney from the Twin Cities, from Minneapolis or St. Paul. And he was saying he had studied the justice system. In Canada, they have a justice system. They have a court system that's sort of integrated from the city level, county level, province or state level, all the way up to their national courts. Here we have 2,634 different justice systems. So when we say we want to change something, it just is not that easy. One of the reasons I believe that children get locked up as an adult is that prosecutors are elected, judges are elected in our counties in Michigan, right? So you vote for a guy or a woman who's tough on law and order. Each person, nobody ever wants to say, I want to be less tough on crime. Everybody runs on a docket of being tough on crime. And so whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you're tough on crime. And what we're trying to do is change that dialogue into looking at best practices that take place in other countries and have in the past taken place in this country. What did I want to talk about? So the issue with prison is kind of interesting, and I go to workshops I've been in just about all the prisons in Michigan. I've got the distinction of having visited over 1,000 times. I know personally and write to, a couple hundred guys and women. I write to some people who are in that magazine, and this didn't start until a few years ago when I realized things need to be done. Who's there to do them? I guess me, right? And I guess you, if you choose to look at this situation from a sort of an intelligent standpoint, what we're doing in Michigan doesn't work, okay? We spend 20% of the state budget, $2 billion a year, on prisons. This doesn't include the jails, right? Right now in Michigan, I was just at a seminar, and I didn't know some of this. Michigan has the longest sentencing in the United States. Michigan, we're at the bottom. Okay, we lock somebody up for longer than any other state does for similar crimes. Michigan doesn't have a disproportionate number of people being locked up. We lock up about the same number of people. What we don't do is we don't let them out. We lock them up for longer and don't let them out. So we have a lot more people locked up. Here's a couple interesting things. This just came out of the New York Times Sunday, right? And there's an article from the 25th, New York Times Magazine, called Justice Springs Eternal by James Foreman. And he says, mass incarceration is a national crisis, but it was built locally. 90% of American prisoners are in state, county, and local jails. Only 10% are in federal prison. And 85% of law enforcement officers are state and local, not federal. In fact, just in the prison system in Michigan, the Department of Corrections employs almost 1 in 3 workers who works for the state of Michigan. It's a big darn business. In the Upper Peninsula, where I have a cottage, it's the largest employer in the Upper Peninsula. Just Leadership, which was just started, there's some branches here in Michigan, asserted until very recently, formerly incarcerated people and their families were rarely heard from in criminal justice debates. This is slowly changing. Mr. Singleton says that some of his center's most effective spokesmen were once incarcerated. Quote, they are the true experts about our criminal justice system, he says. And even more than that, there is no substitute for people in positions of power getting to know and see the humanity of folks who are behind bars or who have returned home. Here's another interesting quote that just kind of blew my mind. In a nation, in the United States, nearly 1/3 of the people have been arrested by age 23. Right now, the adult male population in the United States, 1% is behind bars. This is a way larger proportionate number than any other country. We look at human rights abuses, we go in other countries, we invade other countries, and yet we have a disproportionate number of people locked up. Interestingly, it's not so much a disproportionate number, in my belief, and in studying the statistics of people of color, but more of people of lack of opportunity. More people of color have problems in opportunity, but if you look at the socioeconomic basis, you actually see the true numbers start to you see the truth in numbers. Pro-prison activists have long asserted victims' right on the assumption that if the criminal justice system took victims' experiences and opinions into account, it would treat offenders more harshly. But today, advocates of criminal justice reform are challenging the assumption that crime victims are necessarily want punitive outcomes. In 2016, Ms. Anderson was told, if you ask crime victims to choose between prison and nothing, they choose prison. But people really want more choices. If you ask victims whether they want prison or alternatives like mental health treatment, drug programs, and education, they overwhelmingly choose the latter. And this speaks to the same thing about disproportionate sentencing. 80% of the people charged with crimes in this country cannot afford a defense attorney. That means that 80% of the people in court depend on their public defender to be their voice, to tell their stories, and assert their humanity in a system that routinely denies that. Until we invest in public defenders, our system cannot change. One of the reasons we have such a high incarceration rate is public defenders are in this state are paid by the case. You get whatever that amount is, and it's not very much, to take a case. If it goes to court, you get the same amount. So your tendency is to do as little work as possible, settle it outside. Quick story. This is a true story, right? I'm in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and I'm on the art show, and I'm talking to a guy, and he's in a level 5, right? And you don't usually get to be that close to people in level 5.
Explain what a level 5 is.
In prison, there are different levels. If you're a hardened criminal, violent, you're in what's called a level 5. It means you have the fewest number of privileges. In other words, you often have a cell by yourself, what you see in some of the movies, like Shawshank Redemption type stuff. There's level 4, which means you're doing a little better. There's segregation, which is if you can't even be by yourself in your own cell, they put you in seg. And I have a friend of mine who is in seg constantly. And what happens in the different prisons is you're put in a level according to either your crime or what you're doing in prison. Okay, so some people come in at a level 2 and wind up in level 5 because they commit some violent act. So anyway, I'm talking to this guy, and this guy is sitting next to me, and he starts to cry as he's showing me his art. Now, this is a guy in level 5. They're usually tougher people. They don't usually cry in front of me. And I said, what's that about? And he said, well, where are you from? Are you from Ann Arbor? And I said, no, I'm with this project that I said I live in Oakland County. He says, oh, I'm from Oakland County. I said, really? He says, you know how I got here? I said, I have no clue. And he said, well, I took a snowblower. I stole a snowblower. He said, you're in a level 5? I said, how long you got? He said, 15 to 22 years. I said, for a snowblower? He said, let me tell you the story. I'm drinking one day, and I get this idea, right? I'm coming back from the bar with my girlfriend. And it's November, and it's starting to snow, and I said, I need a snowblower. And lo and behold, the garage door is open, and there in somebody's garage is a brand new snowblower. I said, this is my opportunity. I've got the van. So he pulls up in the driveway, and he gets out, takes the snowblower, and they're wheeling it into the side door of the van, he and his girlfriend. The guy who owns the house comes out. They get in an altercation. There's a fist fight, actually. And the guy who's taking this hit the other guy, and actually, I guess, bloodied his nose. Which is kind of germane to the fact, because the guy happens to be a state policeman who's now retired, and he happens to be the assistant prosecutor in Oakland County.
Oh, wow.
So the guy says, I'm going to give you a plea bargain, take it or leave it. The guy says, I'm not going to take it, and the guy says, I'm going to give you 3 to 5 years. He says, for a friggin' snowblower? And he said, I'm going to go to court. Well, they sentenced him to I think it was 5 to 8. So he goes in, only he's a little guy. He's never been in prison before. Somebody rapes him. Big guy. Guy rapes him again. He says, I can't let this happen again. So he makes himself a shank. Gets a razor blade, toothbrush, gets himself a knife. The guy comes again and he cuts him up. Now he shed blood in the prison. He's a dangerous man. So he sentenced him more time. Wow. Okay? So this is what happens in our system. Now, should the guy have gone to prison or not? I mean, you can leave that debate wherever you want. Should he be in a level 5? The guy was protecting himself. I'm not sure that, any of us might not have done something similar to protect ourselves. I can't speak to what you would do, how you would handle it. I know that I'm not going to just like wait around for somebody to attack me a second time. And the guy was a little guy, so he wasn't going to like get in a fist fight with this other big guy. So, you know, how does that look? Well, it looks bad, and it is bad. Michigan has the longest sentencing in the United States. Michigan also, right now, has actually reduced its prison population. Contrary to popular belief, Michigan doesn't sentence people as long for drug crimes. They once did, but with changes in legislation, Michigan's actually one of the better states for drug crime. Michigan does, however, not have good time behavior. Well, there's only 3 states, I think, maybe 5, that don't have what's called good time behavior. Good time behavior took place in the 80s when people were getting out there given life imprisonment sentences, and people you'd hear they get out, oh, you'll get out in 5 years. Well, the reaction to that was called truth in sentencing. Michigan put on its ballot, do you want truth in sentencing or not? The reason that's important is when you have a ballot initiative that passes, like truth in sentencing, you can't undo that with a legislative thing unless you get more than 2/3 of the vote, which is impossible in this state. Okay, it's not going to happen for political reasons because you're going to be seen as soft on crime. Now, the jails have good time, but the prisons do not. Does anybody not know? Does anybody know the difference between prison and jail? Right?
You better.
Okay, so jails, right, usually county, and it's less time. It's under 2 years, usually under a year, but always under 2. And however, Michigan is now using jails as prison. They've contracted out with several jails in the Upper Peninsula that aren't full, and they're filling them with prisoners who have longer periods of time. So there isn't as much difference as you might think. The greater condition that starts all this stuff, when you look at people who are in prison, including my son, what we tend to forget is a lot of times, I'm on the Family Advisory Board for the Department of Corrections. When I jumped in with both feet.
What is that, Jim?
The Department of Corrections now started a Family Advisory Board. That means they ask people who have incarcerated people in prison to serve on a board and say, what are the problems in prison? Well, the problems in prison are great. One of them is healthcare, access to healthcare. One of them's visits. In prison, when you get what's called a ticket, right, you get in trouble, they don't differentiate between whether you've got homemade spud juice or heroin. You get the same results, which, we're trying to work on something as simple as that. Believe it or not, their computer system is so ancient that they can't track that data. They don't have the capacity to track the data. So there's a lot of information that you'll be getting from me that's very true as far as we know, but some of it is difficult to actually truly track. For example, there are several things we know about prison. People who are successful get education in there, yet there's almost no education in prison. People who get visits from people on the outside are successful, yet only 20% of prisoners ever get a visit from the outside. It means 80% of the people who go in prison, nobody ever talks to them, sees them, goes to the visit room. I've personally visited my son over 800 times, okay? I can tell you who's new of the staff, who's been there. I know all the people. I was embarrassed the other day, right? I'm sitting in the visit room, and you're not supposed to have over-familiarity. And 10 people said, hey, Mr. Dankovich, how you doing? I don't correct them saying Dr. Dankovich because, that ain't going to go well. The one thing you also learn about prison is if you have a problem with patients, that's a place where anything you say won't make things better, but it will make it worse. So if you're like tired of waiting and you're not processing fast enough, and I've got 1,000 ideas and I'll make this happen faster, and I use it at the Family Advisory Board. But what happens in prison is you're a prisoner. If you're a family of a prisoner, you're a prisoner. You have the same results. One of the reasons most people never receive visits are where most of the prisons in Michigan, in the Upper Peninsula. Where are most of the people in Michigan? Not in the Upper Peninsula, okay? They're in the Lower Peninsula, and the majority of people getting locked up are coming from, you know, the Tri-County area, Saginaw, you know, the populated area. Where do people commit crimes? Well, where there are people. If there are no people, you're probably not going to commit a crime. Although where my son is, one guy got locked up for 4 years from the Upper Peninsula for stabbing a cow, which I thought was kind of, you know, not the appropriate punishment. And I just saw today that a guy got locked up got 5 years for taping a dog's mouth shut. Now, I don't think people should stab cows with tape dogs' mouth shuts. Don't misunderstand me. But I'm not sure by sending them to prison that you're going to change anything. I think that what we have, as you saw from that data, most people who are the victims of crime don't necessarily want to see the person locked up, but they don't want nothing to be done. And so there's a concept called restorative justice that we kind of alluded to. Have you talked at all about restorative? Not much.
We haven't got much on it, but to interrupt you real quick, I'd be curious, Jim, if you're willing, this is kind of personal, like what was your ex-wife's family's reaction to the situation with Chris? Were they more
They're supportive. No, they asked for
supportive?
less sentencing than he got, okay? They felt he needed to go away for a period of time. My son was basically had a mental breakdown, okay? That's why he was supposed to go to a psychiatrist on that day. Everybody knew he wasn't acting how he normally acted. We thought we had a little time because this kid had never got in trouble. So the victim's family, and many victims' families that I've met, don't want people locked up for life, okay? So there are different reactions. I was also at a hearing for Jennifer Pruitt, who's in that magazine. She's a juvenile lifer. She was locked up at 16. And they broke into somebody's house that she knew to steal money to get some drugs. And in the process, the person that she was with killed the man. And because she was directly involved in the crime, she's an accessory, so she got life as well. And the victim's family wants her locked up for the rest of her life. So victims' families are different, but I think part of it is in having testified and heard victims' families testify. It's a tough place to go because it teaches you that if you don't move on with your life, some of the families are still stuck in that horror of what happened. And being stuck in that horror, I don't know that it helps ultimately anybody. When people have reformed, I think it's time to look at the fact that they reform. Of course, the big question is how do you reform. But Michigan right now has 43,359 people in prison. We have 179,567 people on probation and parole. 62% of the people who are locked up in jail are waiting for their trial. Again, the question is, if you're not a danger to society, you're not a danger to run, why are you locked in jail? I don't know the answer to that. My son, for example, who was 15, they wanted to put him in jail. And because he couldn't mix with the general population in the jail cell, they wanted him in solitary. He's mentally ill, and what's probably one of the worst things you can do to a mentally ill person is isolate them. I had a lot of talking to do and pulled every string I could. He ended up going to Children's Village, which was a juvenile lockup facility. It's very secure. He just shouldn't have been by himself. He still didn't get much help, but at least he was in a place where he was around people. They let him do school classes and so on. So that's kind of the personal. I know that's there's a lot more to the personal story. My son, Chris, has done a lot of things while he's been in there. He's written a lot. He's been in art shows and in plays. Not everybody does that. People who do those kinds of things tend to do better. One of the reasons he tends to do better is I visited him 800 times. I could have visited him up to 802, but I was sick 2 days, so I couldn't. I'm going to read you. I'm part of the Prison Creative Arts Project, right? And we do a review of prisoner writing. This is not my son's story, but this is actually one of the stories that really a guy wrote by the name of Christopher Wilson. And it's a piece that's maybe still brings tears to my voice and eyes. It's called My Blue Plastic Chair. And it's written by a guy who's incarcerated. And it says, "Today was the same as yesterday. Tomorrow will be the same as today. Trapped within these cinder block walls, these locked doors of steel, these bars of iron, these fences of metal, these people with whom I am not familiar, these societal standards that I can't seem to live up to. When I step out from beyond one, I'm still behind the others. I sit here in my blue plastic chair, surrounded by all these layers, and I wish that my blue plastic chair could fly, grow beautiful wings and soar past it all, these walls, these doors, these bars, and then soar over these fences, these people, these societal standards, and my blue plastic chair would land softly on the thick green grass in my backyard, the place that I call home, that smells of my mom's fresh laundry and my dad's chicken soup. And for once, it's quiet. I shut my eyes and smile. No doors slamming, no sirens, no yelling, no screams, except for my own, that wake me up from my sleep. Things slowly come into focus. There they are. The walls, the doors, the bars, the fences, the people, the societal standards, and then, right there in front of me, in the middle of it all, my blue plastic chairs, and it doesn't have wings." That's written by a guy, and I think it kind of sums up, to me, the humanity of people who are in prison. I think what we see with prisoners is we have an assumption that we make. People are people are people are people, whether they're in prison or they're not. I told you a story of one guy who got, how he wound up in a level 5 in the Upper Peninsula. Nobody ever visits him. The guy took a snowblower, right? This is his story now. The thing that's interesting about the stories about here in Michigan is Michigan makes the international, this is The Economist. The Economist is United Kingdom, maybe the most influential magazine in the world, and they're quoting what's going on here about the prison labor system. A lot of what's happening in the United States today is a movement toward privatization in prisons, and as dangerous as prisons are, private prisons are far more dangerous. The legislature the federal government has made a deal where you cannot sue a private prison for doing anything wrong. So they have no liability no matter what they do to you. If they beat you, they stab you, there's no liability. In addition, they have the right to not have cameras in there, to not have visits, to not have programming, to not have adequate food, and there's not much you can do about it. All of the immigration deportation are private prisons. There's a private prison in Michigan that I happen to know this stuff because my son was to have gone there. They closed it 2 weeks before he was sentenced, thank God. It was known as a gladiator school. Everyone, pretty much throughout, you know the stories, it was Baldwin, and pretty much everybody was raped as they came in. And that was just kind of it. And the guards looked the other way because they're making like $12 an hour. Like, I'm going to get in a fight for $12 an hour. That's the other part of private prisons. So it's a real issue that you want to, one wants to look at carefully. I would challenge you in a kind of an interesting way to get involved in seeing what's going on with this stuff. There's a lot of simple ways to get involved. I sent Aaron a thing for Legislative Day. Coming up in May, there's a day in Lansing where families of the incarcerated are going to be talking with legislators. You're invited. There's also the Prison Creative Arts Project workshop that's going on right now, or the art show going on right now. And there's some astounding art. The interesting thing, if you're there, most of the people at the gallery have met the prisoners, they know the backstories, where some of these pieces are. And if you're into art or you're not into art, it's astounding work. I mean, it's some of the best work I've ever seen. I used to sell art. When you get old, you have a lot of careers. And my first career was actually selling art in the world's largest art reproduction department. We had 10,000 titles. And of those titles, he's going to call up some stuff. This is the the flyer from this year. This is an artist called Oliver Merkel. He's actually from Dearborn. He's got 3 consecutive life terms. He taught himself to paint while he was in there, and he's a hell of a painter, maybe one of the best painters. I've got 2 of his pieces.
This one on the lower left-hand corner is one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Lady Justice with over 2 million people getting funneled into the system.
Mm-hmm. There's some, I was going to bring some pieces, and I didn't, but the Prison Creative Arts Project, what you get to see is the artist, and nearly every single one of them has something political in their piece. I mean, this year, of course, Mr. Trump is in there front and center.
Oh, he's got some good ones.
Yeah, there's whether you like Mr. Trump or not. Okay, I'm not one to say anything. But I do think that you will see that a lot of people in prison have some strong opinions. They've got, a lot of the guys and women don't have anything but time to come up with some opinions. So, I'm not the typical person of a family of prisoners. What I found is that for me, I have resources, I've got education, I've got, there's one of the guys, there's some people looking at some of the prison art. This year, by the way, we have some great 3D art. Aaron's seen this, and I should have brought one of them, but there's the guy last year who's actually alternates between being in segregation, because he can't even be out in the yard for an hour by himself without getting in trouble. And he's in segregation most of the time. And he did some pieces while he was in seg of, the piece is called America. And it's the presidents of the United States and KISS, about this tall, all made out of toilet paper and soap. And he had,
as well.
Yeah, they're amazing pieces. And what he did is while he was in solitary, he couldn't have colors, so he actually leached some of the dyes and stuff out of magazine articles and had people write them on construction paper. So he got the water and took the dye out and then painted it with toilet paper. And these things are so astounding. Wow. The one thing I learned in the process, I bought them all and entered them in Art Prize, which is one of the larger art shows in the world. We didn't win, but we were the lead story on all the news stations because this, the desire to create, which I think all of us have, we all have a desire to make a difference, to do something positive, whether you're locked up or you're not locked up. And so I bought the piece because it just speaks to the innate desire we have to create. Is he a poster child for reform? Probably not. But he's an amazing guy. Like all of us, he has strengths and weaknesses. I try to appreciate people for their strengths. I think the thing I want to talk about, the last thing I want to talk about, I've got a couple of last things, but I want to talk about who goes into prison, right? I said I was on the Family Advisory Board. Interesting statistic. Men's prison, the rate of increase of crime in men's prisons in Michigan is flat. In other words, about the same number of proportionately people get locked up every year. We let some people go, new people come in. It's about the same. But in the women's prison, it's going up in double digits. We have only one women's prison in Michigan. It actually took over the prison next door, so it's actually 2 prisons, but they call it one, so we still only have 1 prison in Michigan. A lot more people locked up there. But what's been happening is the rate of increase is so great that this place is so full that they're going to have to open another women's prison. So they did a survey. What is bringing women into prison? I want to hear a couple. The most interesting statistic, and this is told to me by the Department of Correction. On the survey, now again, they didn't survey 100% of the women, but 100% of the women surveyed had addiction as a primary issue. Drugs. My son's already had 2 roommates. He's had 20 roommates, but his first 2 that were released got in there for drugs, and both of them were dead within 6 months of their release. Okay. This is serious stuff. Did you solve a problem? I don't know what problem you solved. It costs $35,000 plus a year to lock somebody up. All you did is postpone their death. I don't think it's a good idea. The argument is you got them off the street for that period of time. I would argue there are a lot better ways of getting people off the street that might aid in societal norms instead of harm them.
More of a public health model.
More of a public health model. And the thing, so I go to talk to legislators, and I'm kind of a smart aleck, and so I meet with the guy who's the head of the Senate in Michigan a couple years ago. And he said, well, I said, and I gave him these statistics, we're locking people up longer. And they just cut the funding for parole. What that means is that people who come out now have very few services. So how on earth do you integrate back into society, right? You now have a felony, and there's a movement going on before the legislature right now called Ban the Box, which means on the initial job application, you can't ask, have you ever been convicted of a felony? This doesn't mean you can't ask it in the interview. You can't ask it in the second application, but you can't ask it in the first application. Because what happens is, today, where do you fill out job applications? Online, right? How many of those people do you ever think get to fill out a second application? People have never looked at it, ever. So a 2-year sentence effectively becomes a lifetime sentence because you can't get out of the hole you've dug. Some of the other things that go on with that are diversion into drug courts. That's starting to be a model people are starting to look at. There's a guy who's a Democrat who was actually at that very first criminal justice thing, which was, by the way, taught inside, half of it was taught inside of the prisons. If you've not been inside, you got actually really a cool treat. I mean, being a visitor.
We've actually got several students, I think at least 1 or 2 in this class, that have done the Inside Out program, which is
Yeah.
housed at Macomb.
Okay, yeah.
So some of them have seen the inside there, and myself and other students that went to that as well.
Yeah.
So they are.
And it's an awesome program.
Great exposure for them, I think for the prisoners inside too, to kind of see what
It's a win-win.
college student.
It's a win-win. Because what happens is suddenly somebody cares, and suddenly you see that, oh, prisoners are not really animals, they have the same stuff as you and I, only they have a disproportionate amount of addiction issues, and they have a hugely disproportionate number of mental health issues. 60% of the people locked up in Michigan have dual diagnosis mental illness when they go in, of major proportion. 60%. So what happened? All of the issue, if you wanted to close the prisons today, all you'd have to do is say, we're not going to sentence people to prison. We're going to sentence them to jail. You no longer have a prison problem. You got a hell of a jail problem, okay? But you don't have a prison problem. This is what Mr. Engler did many years ago. He wanted to save money, close the mental hospitals. What happened to those people? A couple years later, our prison population shot up. Same people. You can't do nothing to help people and expect different results. I mean, it's insane, right? You've got mental illness and substance abuse problems. Where's that gonna wind you up? Well, look at the guy who took the snowblower on a whim, I've had ideas like that before. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I grew up, we didn't have those problems. So what are the action points that you can take? A lot of it is, how do you define crime? How do you define it? It boils down to a definition. You steal something, okay? Well, I would argue that there are different reasons to steal. If you steal because you need it instead of want it, that might be a little different way to look at an issue. It's kind of a messy area to look at, but crime and punishment are messy areas. There isn't an issue of black and white. It's nothing but gray. And the people who do well in sentencing can afford good lawyers. 80% of the people, though, can't afford good lawyers. They have to take the court-appointed guy. And the court-appointed attorney, if you've ever had an experience like that, you will know that often the first time you see him is in the courtroom, him or her, is in the courtroom. What do they know about your case? Nothing. What do they want to do? Get paid and get out of there. And the result is, there's one guy that my son is locked up with my son. He's got life. You know what his court-appointed attorney did? He said, just plead to this, plead guilty. The guy said, if I plead guilty, they'll give me life. He said, throw yourself on the mercy of the court. He did. The court has sentencing guidelines. The attorney told him to plead guilty to life. He probably could have gotten he almost certainly could have gotten less than life. The point is that it's a huge issue, right? The reason you're seeing movement on it now in this state is we can't afford to do what we've been doing. It doesn't work. People recognize that. So what do you do if something doesn't work? I took a class. How many of you know who Tony Robbins is? Have you ever seen him on television? So there's infomercials. He's a motivational speaker. Took a class with him, and you know what he said? If you're doing something that doesn't work, try something else, including standing on your head. Because what you know is what you're doing isn't working, and anything, including standing on your head, is more likely to work. The system here in the United States does not work. We have a, my son was actually in this. This is the Harvard Review, educational review, right? And this was written last summer, maybe the summer before. And it's on disrupting the school-to-prison pipeline. And you've probably heard that thing before about the school-to-prison pipeline. It is a true thing. If you don't get a good education and if you get expelled from school, and people of color are more likely to get expelled from school, you don't have much of a chance, and those are the very people who wind up in prison. There's a direct correlation done by the University of Minnesota between education and recidivism. In other words, going back to prison. The more education you have, the less likely you are to go back to prison. And however, the political will to educate prisoners when you guys have to pay for your education, and suddenly prisoners who make, right, you ready for your, do you know what your entering salary is in prison if you get a job?
I think 44 cents.
You're close. No, not an hour. The current entry level is 74 cents a day for an 8-hour day. It's not quite a dime an hour. Okay? If you want to buy toiletries or anything, they cost at least as much as they do on the outside. If you want to buy a can of pop, soda, if you're if you want to buy a can of pop, it's $1.60. So what you've just done is worked 3 days for a can of pop. If you want to get an education, how in the hell are you going to pay for it? There ain't no way. There ain't no way. Because all of the schools want you to pay for their education. There's some Pell Grants, there's some experimental stuff going on with Calvin College, but it's a very small population. On a national level, 500 people. That's not even a blip in the statistic. That isn't even 1,001% of the people. I was able to pay for my son to get some college. I'm glad I did. He stopped doing it because they don't let people, at least in the class he was taking, in the facility he's in, they wouldn't let people from the outside come in. They wouldn't let the inside out type programs. They have since, but they didn't at the time he was doing it. So he elected, to just write and do some other things. How many people are locked up in the United States, right? Most of the people in the United States, we have, I don't even know the numbers too. It's around 2 million people, more than that. But most of the people are locked up in state prisons. That accounts for a little over half the people locked up. So state prisons are not an irrelevant issue. So when I talk about prisons, I'm talking about the state prisons in Michigan, which I know. Local jails lock up about a third of the people. And the federal prisons, youth things, and drug diversion programs take out maybe 10%. So if you look at cost, I would argue that cost of diversionary programs are less. If you look at the fact that you're sentenced from a community, in other words, you're sentenced from a county, when you come home, you come back somewhere to a county, right? If there are no services in the county you got locked up in, and you can't get a job, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, what do you think is going to happen? When you're released from prison, because I work with a lady with the prison ministry in Detroit, if you max out, in other words, you let's say you're behaving poorly in the system, and you get 10 to 15 years, you have to serve your whole 15. Then they have to let you go because you maxed out. When they let you go, you get no services, though. That means you come out, they give you $50 and goodbye, right? You don't have a parole officer. You don't have anybody who can direct you to Medicaid or Medicare or any of the locales. You don't have anything. And a lot of the people, my son called me up and said, Dad, there's a guy getting out after 45 years. All of his people are dead. He knows nobody on the outside. He hasn't had a visit in 25 years. He's going to be released. He's a good guy. He works hard. He never gets in trouble. Can you help him find a job? And actually I did. I met the guy, interesting guy, nice guy, but he's 74 years old. His life is so different now. He had friends in prison. He's got very few on the outside. He had a certain amount of respect in prison. He works at a homeless shelter now, and he does have some respect. He's a guy you have to respect. He's a nice man. The point is that if my son hadn't called me, he would be another one of those people that, you know, just didn't have a job, and the Lord knows where he would wind up. Probably sleeping under a bridge, because that $50 runs out pretty quick. I don't know about you. What I do is, one of the things I do, and there's a lot of ways you can get involved if you have a sense that maybe you want to get involved. Aaron knows some of them. There's a wonderful lady, June Walker, who works out of Hope Church in Detroit, and I put together backpacks for her with toiletries. So the guys who come out, and women who come out, who don't have anywhere to go, she takes them from homeless shelter to homeless shelter and have their toiletries in a backpack, because they're $50 they need for stuff, you know. And they get fed. I mean, it's not a life most of us would want to lead, but she helps people try to find jobs. So I guess there are other ways. The legal stuff I talked a little bit about, Citizens for Prison Reform. You can get involved. Most of the stuff is micromanaged for prisons by the legislature. The Department of Corrections is given a budget. They have to fuss with the budget and do the best they can. People would argue they could do better. They probably could. I would say that the more I understand the problem, the more I realize how difficult it is to solve. You can't continue to do what we're doing. Everybody knows that. You can't continue to do what we're doing. It doesn't work and we can't afford it. And we got people coming back in the community with no skills, no reentry, no chance of getting a job. What do you do with that, right? You get involved. If you start, June will give you the name of somebody you can write. She'll give you a post office box if you don't want somebody to have your post office box. Write somebody. Maybe visit somebody. Maybe go to the Prison Creative Arts Project. Maybe go to a legislative day. Maybe get involved on some level. Maybe, and the thing that's amazing is we have, you know, we're called a democracy here. We're not a democracy, we're a republic, right? We vote for people who represent us. They're called representatives. You know how many people talk to their representative? I'll bet if I don't want to embarrass you, so I won't ask you who knows who their state representative is, right? I talk to mine regularly. He calls me, actually, to help him out sometimes. He's a Republican, so you would think he'd be anti-prison. He's probably done more than anybody I know. You don't know. People who have a sense of what's right and wrong can accomplish a lot. Angela Davis said, you know, there's a saying, we need to accept the things I can't change. And she said it, I think, better. We need to change the things we can't accept. And the only way to change those things is through involvement. A friend of mine, Buzz, wrote this. Is William Martinez not our brother? And Aaron's got access. He started the Prison Creative Arts Project. He just retired a short while ago. This is from a guy who, in Michigan, was kicked, stabbed by a gang while the guards all looked on. And Buzz came up with this idea that, you know, isn't he our brother too? He was a human being. Whether he did things right or he did things wrong, he probably shouldn't have died that way. I think that the only way you can change that is to change it. And the only way you can change it is to get involved. Whether you're a Trump voter, and I think a lot of Trump voters voted for Trump because they were so sick of government as a status quo, or you were a Hillary voter, it doesn't matter. You still need to get involved in a local level, because on a federal level you can't do much. On a local level you can do a lot. There's stuff here, I'm going to leave this with Aaron. My son wrote for the State Appellate Defender's Office, right? This kid's smart, not smart as his dad. And he wrote for the SATO review, and it's on juveniles in prison, right? It says, give them the key or throw them away. So, I mean, you either give people a key to their future or you throw them away. That's your choice. You can't not look at the problem because it's there. It's there in a big way. So that's it. I'm going to close right now, and we can open up for questions or answers.
Okay, there's a couple things I wanted to hit on first, and then I'll open it up to the students. Can you speak more on, so correct me if I'm wrong, has Chris been in more than 10 years now?
Yeah, my son has served 12 years.
Okay, so he's been in 12 years, so could you briefly go over, like, he had a lot of issues, mental health things,
Yeah.
going into the system?
Yeah.
Okay, can you kind of, like, talk about, like, that timeline? So what were his difficulties coming in initially, and, like, his transition with the conditions of confinement, and how he's progressed now to where he's writing and getting published in really incredible journals and books and et cetera?
Yeah, I think that's the thing that's amazing. And you see this at the Prison Creative Arts Project. The reason I'm so enthusiastic about that project is it literally saved his life. He was suicidal. He tried to kill himself. He swallowed bleach. He managed to get a hold of some bleach. Swallowed it. It's not a pleasant way to go. Fortunately, he couldn't keep it down. They put him in the hospital. That's another one of those phone calls. They call me at 11 o'clock at night and say, your son's head has a problem. We had to take him to the hospital. I said, well, what was his problem? We can't tell you that. Which hospital is he at? We can't tell you that. So, like, why did you call me at 11 o'clock at night so that I couldn't sleep, and you can't tell me why I can't sleep? He had some serious mental health issues, and some of it, they put him on Seroquel, which is basically getting a zombie. The drugs, the pharmacy in the prison is very limited. It's usually cheap drugs that make you docile. That pretty much covers the mental health program. Where Chris is, there were 1,400 people when he started. They had one psychiatrist who came in every other Thursday afternoon for the 1,400 people. So you can probably imagine, the outcome of that. The outcome is he put people on Seroquel. I was able to get some people who visit him, train people who came in as visitors. So he's between writing and getting involved in that, getting outside of oneself. In other words, if you can stop realizing that you are the center of the universe, because you're probably not, and getting out, as he did, getting involved in a play, getting to know some people, starting to come out of the isolation that surrounds many people when you first went in, I suspect, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so the mental health issues really evolved with him because of visitation, friends visiting, writing, and then painting. If you ever saw I was going to bring it, I've got a retrospective of his paintings. Now this year he won another first place for, it's a collage of trees, and it's very pleasant. It's his first, what I think of as happy painting. He described it. That was the feeling he had when they moved him from the juvenile side of the prison to the adult side. Because if you get a bunch of juvenile guys together, guess what happens?
We're at the worst of the worst.
The worst of the worst, yeah. Because it's like, I don't know if people don't read probably Lord of the Flies anymore, but, I mean, you take away, authority figures, and it's pretty ugly. So when he went to the adult side, it was actually better for him. There was less violence because you had some older people. So his mental health situation improved as time went on. He got involved in the Prison Creative Arts Project. He started writing. He's been published. He won the Pan American Award a couple of years ago. He got published in the Harvard Review. He's been published in the Marshall Project. He's been published all over. And he's a good writer. The odd thing is he probably never would have written if he hadn't gone to prison. So, go figure. I mean, but his art in the early years, 5 years ago, his piece was What Time Is It? Was the title of it. And it was a picture of a guy with explosives strapped to his chest with a little timer saying, what time is it? This now, I'm kind of glad as a father that his pieces got considerably lighter than that. Last year's was a leather piece, big stamped leather with leaves. And it was kind of a fall piece. It wasn't happy, but it wasn't dark. So, but one of the things that art does is it allows another method of communication. You can put something on paper or toilet paper sculptures that might be inside you and you can't necessarily say it to your cellmate. So that's one way. Chris, my son he was given 25 to 37 years. Long story, but he was correct. He said, I could plead mental illness, but I believe that anybody who kills somebody is mentally ill, which I can't argue with. And B, at least temporarily. And B, he said, what happens is they put you in Michigan, you go to the place for the criminally insane, which
is indefinite placement.
yeah, it's like, it's hell. I mean, if you could define hell, that's like everybody's on drugs and nobody's watching them, and none of them are coming out. So,
What do you think his chances are, honestly, Jim, like when he gets at the 25-year mark? I mean, we both know the parole system is kind of messed up in Michigan now, but I mean, you have a lot of support, you have a lot of community connections. I mean, after he gets flopped a couple times, do you think it's possible?
well, he'll get out.
Max out. Well, I mean, not max
I don't
out,
think
but
he'll
eventually
max out.
parole.
Yeah, he'll get parole. I hope I'm alive to see it. Because if he maxes out, I'll probably be dead. I'll be 95 plus. I mean, I won't be of much help to him probably. He'll be helping me. So it's, what are his chances? I can't speak to chances because a lot of that stuff, as you know, Michigan, well, it'll change. We have a parole board that's appointed by the governor. It used to not be a political institution. It's purely political. So depending on who's in office, this governor has, I don't think, pardoned but one person in his entire 8 years. He has the total worst record on parole. And yet, Governor Milliken, who's still living, who's a Republican, conservative Republican, said that his one wish is he would have pardoned more people.
Granholm let a lot out too. I believe Granholm let out Mary too.
Yeah, Granholm let out Mary, but Mary also had a lot of connections, as many of us do. What happens in all this stuff is it still boils down to who you know. I mean, I hate to say this, but the guys who are isolated from the more disadvantaged socioeconomic communities and women have way less chance.
They're going up against a stacked deck. You're
Yeah.
absolutely right. So you got to have cards up your sleeve in order to really.
Yeah, it's tough. It's a tough way to go. I mean, it's not right. That's why I'm doing this. Not for my son. My son's got what he's got. It's going to turn out the way it turns out. But there's a lot of people who don't have anybody who have a voice, right? And if you don't have a voice, and I have one still, can't stop it. Go ahead. You have another question?
No, that was it. So I'll open it up to the audience. Any other questions for Jim about his work, about his son's conditions of confinement?
If you don't, he's going to buy lattes.
Right. Oh, yeah. Jim, you got way more money.
I know you said your son had some artwork at PCAP.
Yeah.
Has his work ever made it to the galleries?
Yeah, it's in the gallery now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's had work every single year.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's what changed his brain power. Actually meeting the people in PCAP. And one of the nice things is now I've gone on the trips for a few years, and I get to see the same, it's sad but true, you get to see the same people over and over again. You establish a relationship. And I have quite a few, I can honestly call them friends that are in there. So does my son. I can't visit, because I visit him and I'm a family member, I can't go on the art selection trip to where he is. Yeah, he's in that institution. But it's funny because I was visiting with him a couple of years ago when the art selection crew came in, and he was so disappointed. Because there, you can't move from one spot to another. In other words, once they were there, he could no longer get there. And he just watched them all come in, and he, as much as he wants to talk to his dad, he'd much rather talk to the people he doesn't get to normally talk to.
Absolutely.
So have any of you gone in? Have any of you seen the inside? And there's some inside out people here? Yeah. Yeah. What class was that?
It was just called the Inside Out Prison Exchange, and it was at Muslim facility.
Okay. And was it a class in sociology or?
It was a criminal justice class.
Okay.
We talked more about, we talked a lot about problems that are within the system of mass incarceration and stuff.
By the way, there's a group called the Michigan Initiative to
And mass incarceration.
End Mass Incarceration. If you want more information, he has it. If he doesn't have it, I can get it to him. But it's the first group. What we're talking about mass incarceration is what we're saying is, are there people who probably should be locked up? Probably. Okay, I don't think anybody would argue with that. But I think that there are a lot of alternatives. Not everybody who's in prison committed a violent crime. In fact, most people didn't. And even the people who committed violent crimes, what's interesting is most people age out of crime. Who commits most crime? People under 30. How many 78-year-olds like murder people? Actually, there's a guy who murdered his wife at 78. One can only imagine what she did at that point. He had been drinking, so there you go, back to the substance abuse. And mental illness, no doubt. And you get cooped up with a wife for, I think he was married for 70 years, 60 years, whatever the hell it was. They got married really young. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what makes you like snap at that point. I mean, she must have said something.
So far, we've had a very active campus now, not just my current students, but formers. I've had students come up to Legislative Day, which I'll put that out, which you just gave that to me. Lots of students have come up to the PCAP auction, the PCAP national show, other stuff too, where we just do experiential prison trips and stuff, and I think it's been really eye-opening for them to really kind of see and be more of that voice for the shadows inside. So I'm excited, just to have you talk about that and give them that different perspective.
It's a great perspective. I mean, I have one of my very dear friends now. I met Pete.
Yeah.
Well, Pete is now with the State Appellate Defender's Office. He was in solitary confinement for 9 years. And he's one of the few people who came out of it in better shape than he went in.
He certainly has, and I still don't understand how he's
Yeah.
a social butterfly to this day, and an attorney now.
Yeah,
as well.
I was at his graduation. He's an attorney. He's working for the State Appellate Defender's Office. He has the status of the only person I've ever heard of who turned down a
Soros Justice
Soros
Fellowship. We were just
Justice
talking
Fellowship.
about that the other
He
day.
turned down a
like,
Soros
crazy.
Justice Fellowship grant to go work at the State Appellate Defender's Office. It's a man of great integrity. I mean, he's probably making a small fraction of what he would have gotten in the grant. But he knows it's the right thing to do, and he's one of the guys who knows the system just like Aaron. When you know the system from the inside and you see what the inherent problems is, this is the thing. This is my ongoing thing is ask the people who have been through the system. There was a lady who was going to come to me today. With me today. She backed out at the last minute. She got out Tuesday.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. She was a young woman when she was 19. She was driving drunk, and she killed somebody, a young mom. They have 2 young kids, and the family wants her locked up for life because they took the mom's life. She is out. She served 6 years. She could have gotten out in 5, but the family felt that she should have served more time. And I can't speak to that. I only know that whatever happens, that mom isn't going to be back in this world, no matter how long this other person is locked up. And that's, I think, where the hope for restorative justice is, where there's something where that victim's family gets some peace, and maybe there's something she needs to do it. But that's not something you can do in today's world. You can get in serious trouble for contacting the victim's family, which I think is wrong, particularly if you want to apologize.
I agree. And victims are not even afforded the opportunity to have an alternative. Because like you said, there are a lot of victims who would like to have that closure in a different way instead of an exclusively punitive, reaction to a crime. But I think if they want punitive, you have to respect that to a certain extent. But if they do want a more restorative approach, or even a blend of the two, I think the victim should have a lot more input. Unfortunately, they don't. Sometimes they can do like a victim statement, a sentencing hearing, but honestly, they don't pay attention to that.
We
It's
had a
what the
victim
DA
statement.
wants for the most part.
Yeah, the victim's family asked for Chris to get 10 years or less.
Yeah.
And that's read in the record, and he's at 25.
Is there death penalty in Michigan?
No.
No.
Michigan actually is one of the only states that has never had a death penalty.
Really?
Wow. Before we were a state, a guy was wrongfully hung. And it was right before they drafted the state constitution in 1837, and it was still fresh in everyone's mind, so they elected, because of that, to never have a death penalty. There's been movements to get one, but
I think so. We were the first to abolish it. I think.
we never had it. So
Right. No, but I'm saying what the national level
Yeah.
it was, but we as a
Yep.
state said, look, we're abolishing it. We're not going to abide by the federal guidelines. So we took a step forward to say that this is not how we're going to react to crime. It's actually shocking to me because we are kind of punitive, like Jim was talking about. Long sentences and also indeterminate sentences is another huge problem in Michigan. So I see we're running out of time. One last question, if we got it. Otherwise, we'll give it a close. All right, please give Jim a big round of applause.